Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Radcast on solutions, the meta solution, and solutionaries. And I'm happy to be joined by my colleague and co-host, Michael. How are you doing today, Michael?
Good. It's good to be here. Looking forward to having the conversation.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Well, let's jump in. We've decided to start this off by sharing sort of a metaphor or an analogy to what we to basically the problem of, the problem we want to solve, the solutions we need to solve it, and the meta solution, and in fact, solutionary. So we start with this beautiful image of the Grand Canyon, and let's talk about the goal of crossing that chasm. Like when Evel Knievel jumped across the Grand Canyon with his motorcycle sometime back in the 70s or 80s or whenever he did that. So if the goal is to clear the Grand Canyon, if that's kind of our metaphor for solving the problem of abrupt climate change, halting abrupt climate change, and saving as much of life on Earth as possible, it's this seemingly intractable, seemingly extremely wicked problem. Not just seemingly, it's an extremely wicked problem. So to cross the chasm, we need the right people, like Evel Knievel. But we don't just want to send Evel Knievel out there, jumping across it like he was Carl Lewis with just his tennis shoes. We need to arm Evel Knievel with the right tools and equipment. In this case, a motorcycle. In his case, a motorcycle. In our case, we need each of these parts of the motorcycle. Let's let that be analogous to a solution. So if each of these parts is a solution, and some of these parts, like you see that engine in the middle, by far the most complex and perhaps critical part, that itself is made up of a whole bunch of other smaller parts. And so each of these parts is a solution. And so the engine itself could sort of be seen as a system of solutions. So there will be solutions, there will be systems, but ultimately the whole thing needs to be integrated together into a motorcycle that Evel Knievel can get on top of and clear the canyon, accomplish the goal. That's us halting abrupt climate change, metaphorically. So back to the individual solutions. How do we both generate all these solutions individually and integrate them together into one final complete solution, right? Or holistic set of solutions, I guess we'd say. And so that's what we're going to be delving into today, is, that bigger picture of how do we generate all the specific solutions that we need and how do we integrate them into a whole. So we're taking a truly holistic approach. And we, I don't know what else to say about it. I mean, the problem of halting climate change is so complex because it's born out of so many aspects of life. Our carbon economy, modern agriculture to feed 7.35 billion people, and all the livestock. Because so many people are essentially addicted to eating meat. There's just, and our, automobile lifestyle and our lifestyle of building big homes and needing to have as much property as we can. So basically the economy of hoarding has really, put us in this terrible predicament.
Yeah, we could call it the Grand Chasm.
The Grand Chasm. Yeah, it's the Grand Chasm of all of our current set of living arrangements and our economic arrangements and forms of government and lobbying and everything else that keeps us on this runaway train the suicidal runaway train of our current existence, which is destroying life on Earth and generating this massive overheating. So we need to not necessarily halt that train, but definitely take it onto a new course and radically transform the train. So it's not about destroying the train, destroying the whole economy and everything, and just going back to hunter-gatherer. That it's a bit late for that, frankly. So we're going to actually, instead of destroying all this technology, it's about repurposing it and transforming ourselves and our economy. Among the solutions that we need to generate are solutions for basically geoengineering, for cooling the planet by various means. For example, geoshading, putting up giant reflectors either on the surface of the Earth, the oceans, the Arctic, or suspended by dirigibles or up in space. But by some way or shape or form, we need to alter the heat balance of the planet. Right now, we're just accumulating heat, and that's melting the ice and driving these self-reinforcing feedback loops, such as the loss of the Arctic ice, which takes away that mirror of ice that's reflecting sunlight back into space, causing that sunlight to hit dark blue ocean seawater, which absorbs the heat. So that's an example of a self-reinforcing feedback loops. The hotter it gets, the worse it gets, the more heat we take in. So we need to forcibly halt and, in fact, reverse that process of accumulating heat. We need to be reflecting away heat and diminishing our heat balance. And a diminished heat balance will enable us to refreeze ice and restore balance to our fragile and, in fact, dying world. But in order to do that, in order to really generate that solution and implement it, it's going to require some political transformation and even cultural transformation of our people, so that the people both demand it of their governments, and are willing to sacrifice and contribute to that solution being implemented. I mean, some forms of geoengineering can be extremely costly, into the trillions of dollars. Others can be a lot more economical, in the order of billions of dollars. But regardless, we need to, I just see so many transformations: cultural, political, media, PR, the role of the media, and just our culture as humanity. We need to get out of this mode of just looking after ourselves and how much can each of us hoard for ourselves, and really put focus on our own personal responsibility to contribute to this massive effort, which really hasn't even properly gotten off the ground yet, for building out all these solutions and making sure they get implemented.
One of the things that came to mind when you were showing the parts of the motorcycle and the parts of the engine is some of those pieces, those parts may well have been made for that motorcycle or motorcycle like that, or for motorcycles generally speaking, whereas some of them may not have been, right? They were designed and produced for some other purpose, but as it turns out, they work perfectly well on a motorcycle, to put one together. And so it's interesting how if we have a network, well, I was going to call it an intelligent one. If we had a collective intelligent network, right, then even though I may not know what use my contribution may be put to, it won't be lost. It'll be taken and applied to maybe a higher use or another use, right? So that it's repurposed, and that intelligence is leveraged, right? So much intelligence is lost, has gone to waste. The reason why they're able to, use parts, for example, that they built, for the space program, and materials and stuff, right? Able to like take that and then repurpose them for uses here on Earth, right? Because there's a network there, there's a whole system in which all of that technology is not lost. And yet so much intelligence on Earth is lost because it's not a part of a meaningful, network, um, where intelligence is not only valued but utilized. Um, even if even if I myself don't know, like I said, to what use it may be put.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Um, and that might be a great segue into kind of our broader discussion about the meta solution, which is which can be thought of. So the platforms that there's perhaps a picture here would help. So let me just do a little sketch. So we if we think of all the solutions that need to be built to halt abrupt climate change, maybe we could just think of them as like this being represented as a whole bunch of solutions within this big circle. So all these little shapes are solutions within that. There's a part of this, all the solutions that we need, which we call uh, the not just the meta solution, but let's just call it platforms and systems, right, of the meta solution, right? So what is the meta solution? So let's address that. The meta solution is basically, so I'll represent it as, a network of platforms. I'm just drawing platforms as these little rectangles, a network, so they're all connected together, combined with the people, a community of people who will use this network. So the combination of people and the network of platforms, so I'll just put platforms here. So these people and platforms will come together and they will be that combination which generates all of the solutions that we need, all of the solutions in that big circle, all of the parts of the motorcycle, including the designs and plans for integrating all those parts together into a complete motorcycle. So on this side over here, on the right side, this is the meta solution. It's that combination of platforms and other systems and tools. So I'll just put here platforms, etc., other systems and tools, which, when combined with the right community, and one could add with the right culture, which is something that, as we mentioned, needs to evolve as well.
Yeah.
For this to
namely
happen.
A culture of solutionaries.
Yeah. A culture of solutionaries and, co-creation, right? Let's get together and let's co-create all this stuff. And many other aspects to that culture. But all of this is actually meta solution singular. I would call all of this the meta solution because it is all of this as a whole, all of this as a whole, which when properly combined together and used in harmony in a symbiotic way, all of that as a whole will generate solution after solution after solution, ultimately every single part of the motorcycle, as well as the integration and testing of the motorcycle itself, of that holistic set of solutions, which will halt abrupt climate change. So again, if all of this big circle is the entire set of solutions that we need to build, what we're essentially doing is we're dividing that into the meta solution, which includes people and platforms, as well as all the other solutions other than the meta solution. And in fact, the goal is really all these other solutions. It's this green part of the picture, by far the largest part, because here we're talking thousands and thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of individual solutions that make up, I'm just going to call them, the other solutions, right? By that I mean the non,
or specific solutions.
Yeah. The other solutions, which again, I like that, specific solutions. These are specific solutions to
specific problems,
the world's problems, really, because we need to solve them all holistically. And then this blue portion here is, the meta solution, which consists of people and platforms and systems. That which generates. So if we had to do this as a cartoon, this meta solution is generating all these others. This is the engine, right, that generates all the others. So let's talk about. Well, first, I think it'd be helpful if we kind of opened the kimono a little bit and talked about our own journey as regards solutions as well as the meta solution. So for the past few years, we, you and I and other colleagues, have been working on a number of different specific solutions as well as the meta solution. So I just kind of want to share, just so that people get to know about us a little bit more and our own journey. Some of the solutions that we've been working on have been focused on ending world hunger. So one of those solutions is the community cafe, which we've prototyped in Southern California with very good success. And its concept is very simple. Make food a basic human right. Let's end world hunger. If everyone has plenty of nutritious foods to eat, we'll have just a whole different world where you don't have a kind of a permanent underclass that's undernourished and therefore at a huge disadvantage in terms of living their life in the world and being productive. And this can actually be accomplished very economically. We estimate with an annual budget of perhaps $50 billion per year, which is about less than 5% of total U.S. military spend. I mean, can you imagine the goodwill that the United States would gain by spending a fraction of their military budget on ending world hunger all around the world? My goodness, there would immediately be billions of people who would just be in love with the United States for doing that. And it can be done at not that much cost. Well, given that the federal government of the United States seems to be on quite a different track, we decided to come up with our own funding engine for that, which is a new standard for a compassionate economy called CCC, or Certified Compassionate Companies, which would donate 100% of their profits to eradicating hunger and also be socially transformational and ecologically regenerative in all their business practices, hiring practices, caring for their people, etc. And but all the profits, after paying all their bills and all those costs for taking care of their employees and producing great products and services, all their profits after all that, and after taxes, of course, would go to funding, or institutions such as the community cafe, projects and programs such as the community cafes. This wouldn't be the only one. And then if you look at what that could create in terms of a bigger picture, the idea is that this would start a virtuous cycle. So Triple C companies donating their profits to ending hunger through community cafes, that would be a huge story. And the media would cover it, and consumers could learn about it and say, wow, you know, shoot, let's buy Triple C products and services so that we can support these community cafes in ending hunger. And so the first company that raised their hand and said, hey, we'd like to be a part of that is the Japanese fashion house Sato Hemp, led by my brother, Mr. Takuya Sato, pictured in the lower right. He leads the hemp industry in Japan, and he's an extremely compassionate person. He is, as the leader of the hemp industry in Japan, he is the hemperor of Japan. So we got the hemperor of Japan on board for being the first Triple C company and funding community cafes. Now, this is all in the prototype stage, and this kind of gets back to our bigger story. So we were focused on, you know, certain parts of the motorcycle, you know, those parts that would basically take care of humanity by ending hunger and providing nutritious food and water, and ultimately taking care of all basic human needs, including shelter and medical care and you know, so many fundamental human needs that can all be met relatively very efficiently, actually, if we look at it holistically. For example, I mean, it's much more economical to end hunger through building community cafes that feed hundreds or thousands of people at a time than, you know, one by one feeding individual families with packaged foods and, you know, transport and all that. So anyway, we have been focused on building certain parts of the solution to the world's problems. And we'll talk about other solutions that we've been working on as well. But increasingly, we've seen a need to look at the picture even more holistically, and really address all the world's problems simultaneously, specifically abrupt climate change, which could kill all of us and render all of our work on community cafes completely useless in the end if abrupt climate change wipes out our agriculture base and our ability to grow food in the first place. So we really need to look at the whole of all of these specific solutions and how to integrate them into one big, you know, integral network of solutions.
Yeah, integration on a higher level, and you know, it's a dialectical process. Whereas the system, you know, as it exists, because it deals with parts, not wholes, right? Not parts and wholes, you know. It would be like Evel Knievel, you know, instead of clearing the Grand Canyon with the intact, you know, integrated motorcycle with, you know, a backpack with all the parts in it, which of course would only weigh him down that much fast. Yeah, straight to the bottom. We're basically Evel Knievel approaching that cliff. And, you know, do we have a backpack full of parts, or do we have an integrated motorcycle?
Exactly. So increasingly within the Radish community, we've been focusing on the meta solution that will generate all the solutions that we need. And the meta solution that we've been conceiving of and building in terms of building its platforms and its community, what it ultimately entails is building a massively higher form of intelligence than any human-based intelligence that we've ever seen in the history of mankind on planet Earth, including the great collaborations of history, such as NASA, the Soviet Union prevailing in World War II against the Nazis, and many other examples of humanity coming together to accomplish, seemingly impossible tasks. What we believe we are on the cusp of is completing the design. Now, the implementation will lag behind a little bit, but hopefully not too much, especially as we bring in the rest of the tech sector. But I'd like for us to kind of describe the meta solution that we've been coming up with and the basic idea behind it. So I think maybe the best place to start would be one of the components, one of the parts of the meta solution, which is the brainstorming part. So that's, kind of like, anyway, it's a 4-minute video. Shall I go ahead and just play the video and then we can?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Let's see it.
Go ahead and do that. All right. Dun, dun, dun. Wait a second. Where did that end up? I think over here. Okay, here we go. All right.
Rose to popularity in the early 1950s with the promise of producing more ideas.
Let me restart this. Sorry about that.
Hi, I'm Dr. Tony McCaffrey. Brainstorming, the practice of sharing ideas while withholding judgment, rose to popularity in the early 1950s with the promise of producing more ideas. The problem is, it never worked. No study has shown that brainstorming produces more ideas than people just working alone for a while and then coming together to share their ideas and build on them. It doesn't work because sharing one idea at a time, by talking no less, is incredibly inefficient. Further, extroverts always dominate introverts.
Okay, let me just refresh this. For some reason that happens from time to time. Here goes. All right, so let's get through this ad, and then I'll be able to fast forward.
We've all been there.
Yeah. Okay, here goes.
Brainstorming with my colleagues directly challenge an approach I pioneered with my colleagues directly challenges the foundation of brainstorming by asking, why do we need to talk in the first place? This idea is probably best explained using an example from the lives of insects. Ants solve problems by leaving signals in their environment that influence the behavior of the others. When searching for food, successful ants leave traces of pheromones along their trails, a signal to the other ants that there's a path to dinner. If we make a problem-solving graph, then humans can quietly leave their signals, that is, their ideas, for others to build upon. In a brainstorming graph, the goal grows downward into refined sub-goals. Resources are interacted together and grow upward. When the two directions connect, solutions start to emerge. Let's see how brainstorming would handle a classic management problem, like this real-life conundrum at the company Pacific Power and Light. Winter storms in the Cascade Mountains leave power lines loaded with ice, which if left unattended will break the lines. Having workers climb the poles to shake the lines is both dangerous and time-consuming. Management searched for a better method for years. What if they had used brainstorming? To start, they would simply place the goal at the top of the brainstorming graph and a few known resources at the bottom. Then the group would be instructed not to talk, but to simply add post-it notes and drawn lines to the graph. People who are naturally top-down thinkers would start refining the goal. Other naturally bottom-up thinkers would analyze how the resources could be used, or they would add new resources. Pretty soon, the two directions would connect, an indication that the group is finding ways to use the resources to solve the problem. This figure shows a careful refinement of the goal, as well as Pacific Power and Light's actual solution of using the helicopter's downdraft to shake the lines enough to remove the ice. Other solutions are also shown, including using a helicopter to drop a de-icing agent onto the lines, and using the conducted electricity to generate enough heat to melt the ice on the outside of the lines.
All right. So with that, we see what we believe is a very powerful methodology for generating solutions. And one of the key parts I want to point out about that is that it enables people to make specific contributions that don't constitute the whole solution, but constitute a part of the solution, like refining the goal into what Dr. McCaffrey calls sub-goals. We actually refer to those as different ways of achieving the goal. But those are contributions in and of themselves. Identifying resources that might be useful in achieving the goal are other contributions. So I want to point out a term called micro contributions. And so what we're seeing with the brainstorming is a very efficient framework for people to make micro contributions towards a larger solution that will achieve the goal. And so really if you could boil it down to its essence, for me, the essence of the meta solution is a network of platforms and systems and tools that facilitate humanity to make all the micro contributions that we need to make, basically build all the little components and parts for the motorcycle, for the grand holistic solution. And as you pointed out earlier, Michael, it's not about necessarily inventing constantly, new parts, but simply taking off-the-shelf components and integrating them together. And in fact, the work of integration of all the different parts or all the different solutions into the holistic set of solutions that will ultimately halt climate change, that integration itself can be made up of parts, of micro contributions. And so lots more to say about that. Please jump in whenever you can or want, Michael.
It's kind of it's an integrating machine, right? And its virtue is that it can integrate different kinds of things. You can, but essentially, it's taking things that are out there or that have yet to come into being because they haven't been invented, and coming up with new configurations, right? New forms, but we're talking here on a global scale consisting of all the industries of the world, right? And all of their information, knowledge, skill sets, etc. And essentially figuring out what combination of what is needed to solve our problems and to clear the grand chasm.
Exactly. And so, let's talk about the parts of the meta solution that we've been working on. One is integrating the brainstorming methodology that we just saw into kind of a larger framework. So in this example that Dr. McCaffrey presented, it was about removing ice from power lines. let's take a look at really what we see as the big picture. I'm going to show some slides from a presentation I made to the Sierra Club back in March. So again, how do we go from removing ice from power lines to solving the world's problems? So we start with the goal. In this case, in our case, once we've solved all the world's problems, we will have a whole world. We're just kind of looking at it high level, big picture. Well, what does it take to have a whole world? Well, we need wholeness for people and wholeness for the planet. This is one way to break it down, and there's lots of ways to break it down. But let's say we continue with this way. Well, if we have wholeness for people, we need to meet all of their physical needs, like for food, like with community cafes, for example, shelter, wellness, clothing, their kind of higher needs for community and culture and story and purpose, etc. And then the needs for the planet to be whole. The air needs to be whole, the water needs to be whole, the land needs to be whole, the ecosystems need to be whole, etc. And there are many ways that we can then break this down into further detail just to show it conceptually. You know, there's this, here we kind of break it down into, you know, like taxonomies. These just give some examples of rooting down into certain parts of the taxonomy. But the bigger picture is that in the end, we end up with these, what I call leaf nodes at the very bottom, such that if we can meet each and every one of those leaf node needs, then all of those will roll up to having a whole world. And so here I draw it in a slightly different form: whole world, people, planet. You break down the taxonomies till you get to these, a very large number of leaf node needs. And then for each of those needs, each of those specific needs of a whole world that we need to fulfill all of them, let's take one of those, for example. Well, one of those needs is we need to remove ice from power lines. If we want to have, you know, working electrical networks, we need to take the ice off the power lines. So the reason I bring this example in is just to point out that that one is a subset of the needs of a whole world. And in fact, pretty much any goal that's worth achieving will be a subset of meeting the needs of a whole world. And so here we use very much the same structure as the brainstorming example, where we break that need down into, again, what Dr. McCaffrey calls sub-goals. We call them ways of fulfilling that need, and then the things underneath it we call literally subways and sub-subways. So there's all this whole, you know, mini taxonomy of ways to meet whatever need. And then very analogous to the brainstorming example is the combination of resources to achieve one of those specific ways. And that's where solutions start to emerge. And so we represent solutions in blue as those blue ovals that really, you know, are the bridge between the resources and a way to meet those needs. So if our ultimate goal is to meet all of the needs, and so to come up with myriad solutions that will meet each and every one of those leaf node needs. Now, what's interesting to notice is that every time we implement a solution, there may be unintended consequences, which we indicate as these red lines here. Well, these red lines indicate unintended negative consequences. So, for example, in the example for removing ice from power lines, if we use helicopters, those have unintended consequences of burning hydrocarbons, generating greenhouse gases, noise pollution, you know, wind pollution, you know, so those can have myriad unintended negative consequences, which we draw in red. There are also cases where there are unintended positive outcomes. So let's say, for example, this solution right here is the community cafe, and its one singular intended outcome is to end hunger. Okay, fair enough. That's this thick blue line. There can be some red lines that indicate unintended negative consequences, but there can be unintended positive consequences as well, which we indicate by these thinner blue lines, which could be, you know, creating community, which is, you know, great for people's holistic health, right? That wasn't the initial goal. The initial goal was, let's make sure everyone has enough to eat. But we have the unintended positive consequence that we create community and all kinds of great opportunities that come from bringing people together in such a healthy context. Now, more generally, any given solution will have some unintended negative consequences, as well as unintended positive consequences, as well as the intended positive consequence of the solution in the first place. The point that I'm making here is that ultimately we need to look at a set of solutions as a whole, and we need to look at all of the impacts, positive, negative, and neutral, of all those solutions on all of the needs of a whole world. And the goal, very much like solving a very complex puzzle, is identifying exactly that set of solutions, you know, maybe these 5 and another 50,000, right? Identifying exactly that set of solutions which will meet all of the needs of the whole world. And so if we compress this last image down to this, you know, narrower rectangle here, we got resources at the bottom, combinations of resources, the needs of a whole world at the top, which break down to these leaf node needs and ways of meeting those needs, and then solutions in the middle. This is fundamentally what we're talking about here. So we want to be able to have a framework where people can get together and collaborate on building these solutions. Enter what we call the conversational domain. This is a separate domain, and this is where people get together and have conversations about the world, its needs, ways of meeting those needs. So these conversations will map to and in fact fuel the development of these specific solutions, as well as conversations about the integration of all these solutions. And so I think I'm going to stop screen sharing for a minute just to be able to talk about the conversational domain and kind of our core paradigm here. So in the conversational domain, conversations will happen predominantly through video conferences such as the one that we're on right now. And of course, this video conference is being recorded. So that, now why are we recording? We're recording this video conference so that the artificial intelligence can transcribe what we're saying, transcribe our sounds into text. And that text can then be indexed and mapped to the various taxonomies, like the taxonomy of the whole world and its needs, the taxonomies of the different ways and subways, those orange boxes, which Dr. McCaffrey calls sub-goals, as well as taxonomies of resources, solutions, the impacts of solutions, intended, unintended, positive, negative, etc. Imagine that all of those elements exist in a database and some of topics, and many of those topics are organized into very well organized taxonomies, like the needs of a whole world. The idea of transcribing our conversations is so that we can map our conversations to those myriad topics in those different taxonomies, so that many different scenarios can be enabled that accelerate this whole process of generating solutions. So for example, let's say that there's a group that's having a meeting, a group of 4 or 5 folks having a meeting on component solution or a part of a solution, and they're trying to design it or trying to integrate its resources together to make that solution viable, and they're getting stuck on some fundamental question that they can't quite resolve. Well, given that, now here we're going to be making extensive use of artificial intelligence. So you'll have AI systems that are essentially listening in on each of these conversations as they progress, as well as analyzing the conversations after they've happened, analyzing the recordings. And it's you could look at it fundamentally as a pattern matching problem. They're basically looking at each solution in progress, or each conversation in progress about a solution as a whole or a part of that solution, and they're looking to see the patterns. So if they see that the solution is nearly complete, but they're really getting stuck on this one part, they're going to seek, the AI will seek, with the help of humans, to identify what is that part that's missing, and who are the experts from other conversations. Remember, because all these conversations are recorded and transcribed and indexed. Who are the experts who know about that missing piece and might be able to join this conversation and give them the appropriate direction? I mean, how many times, either in our education or our working career, have we gotten stuck on some problem and somebody says, well, why don't you talk to this person? They're an expert in that. And then we go and talk with that person and, get the answer. That's the fundamental scenario that we're facilitating here with artificial intelligence and with transcribed conversations, except that instead of taking the normal course of events where you have a problem, you talk to this person, you talk to that person, finally one of them says, well, why don't you talk to this person? This person would probably be able to solve it. Well, then how do I connect with that person? Who can introduce me? Maybe they're busy, right? And this cuts across the topic of the cultural transformation that we need to bring about. Imagine that, and this is all very utopian. I'll be the first to admit that. This is as good as a point as any, is to say the reason we're doing all this and communicating everything we're doing about the meta solution and the entire corpus of solutions and crossing the chasm and all that is because we invite you to join us in this utopian vision and mission of making this all happen. So yes, it's utopian, and yes, we can do it, right? Okay, so imagine we progress and we progress, and there are millions of people participating in the meta solution, being parts of the meta solution, and having all these conversations, recording their conversations, saying, yes, you can record them, transcribe them, etc. Then we'll have a really deep bench. That's a term from baseball. If you've got all these great, players on the bench that are ready to go, you pull them out when you need. Well, we'll have a bench that is millions of people deep, including, some of the smartest minds on the planet, and people with really deep expertise across, tens of thousands of different niches in the world. That's a powerful deep bench, because then if all these people are plugged in, right, and connected, and and they set their status, they say, I'm available, or I'm busy right now, or I'll be back in 2 hours, or whatever. The system can be aware of all that, and so when it needs a person with particular expertise, and that person is available, they say, hey, can we pull you into this conversation? And just like a lot of experts, when you talk with a real expert and you explain your problem, oftentimes you don't even need to finish the explanation. The expert has already figured it out and said, boom, here's what you need to do. You either need to do this, incorporate this part, incorporate this process, or go talk to this other expert who can help you out. But in any case, very quickly, that expert will be able to make their micro contribution to the conversation, to the process of developing that particular solution, and then get out. Get in, make their micro contribution, and get out, right? So like that, click, 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 across thousands of conversations evolving in parallel about different components of the solution, or different, component solutions of the broader holistic solution or set of solutions, by millions of us swarming on all of these component parts of the holistic solution in parallel, we can come up with a whole motorcycle to cross the chasm faster than I think anyone imagines possible right now today. So that's why, you know, after so much of our searching and developing a new standard for the economy, a new model for feeding people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, as the planet's been heating up, we're like, ooh, you know, what we're doing, even though some of the solutions we're developing are really awesome and really powerful, the solution development process is not fast enough. We need a bigger factory for generating solutions, right? And that's why we need a really highly evolved meta solution. So as I was showing on the slides here, and let me just get back to that real quick. This calls for you know, multiple domains. So we've talked about the domain of brain swarming, this one in the middle here, of systematically, step-by-step building solutions. We've talked about the conversational domain, where if it's identified, here, let me show another, let's say it's identified that there is some missing piece, some missing component that we really need ASAP. Well, the AI will help us assemble that team, here highlighted in yellow, to then get together and build out that missing solution. And like I'm describing, in record time. This can all be done very, very fast. So in this process between the conversational domain and various layers of artificial intelligence and the solution builder domain, building off the great work Dr. McCaffrey and colleagues have done on building out, you know, the brain swarming process, these are kind of the first two phases of the meta solution. There's a couple more phases that are all equally important. Another on the right-hand side here is a simulator. We need a simulator of all of Mother Earth, of the entire planet, all of her ecosystems and life-supporting systems, which can tell us, hey, if you implement this set of solutions, this will be the results. That's analogous to having a model of the motorcycle that we're evolving and saying, hey, evil, if you get on the motorcycle and it's with this set of parts, this will be the result. Either you'll cross the chasm or you'll only get halfway. Well, if it only gets halfway, we need to keep going back to the drawing board and playing around with different combinations of parts until we build the right motorcycle. That's where an optimization layer, here pictured in red in the upper right, comes to our aid. Because rather than us manually fiddling around with different combinations of solutions and inputting them into the simulator manually, we let the optimization layer do the work with, as you might have guessed, artificial intelligence. And that actually used to be the focus of my professional work some decades ago, a couple decades ago. Those were good times. But anyway, bottom line, this is a whole art and science in itself of building a global holistic model, a model of the entire world and solutions and a way to simulate them and an optimization layer on top of it. And then there's one other phase that's not pictured here, which is once you've developed and identified the optimal set of solutions and simulated it all and optimized it all, now you have to go about implementing it. Now the implementation itself calls for yet other solutions. Political solutions, financial solutions, cultural solutions, mass media, PR, and marketing solutions to get those portions, those segments of humanity on board who need to get on board so that we can get all of this implemented in time. So that's, you know, kind of a big, broad overview of, you know, the meta solution as we're conceiving of it. And, you know, the urgency could not be greater. The planet is heating up, apparently exponentially. We have a pretty good grasp on the myriad self-reinforcing feedback loops that are at work driving this. And we need to urgently cross the chasm of halting all of those self-reinforcing feedback loops with some major interventions, including geoengineering, holistic land management, cleaning up the oceans, transforming agriculture, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Lots more to say on all this, but we've been talking for a while. I'm going to go on mute so we can hear you, Michael. Take all the time you need. Love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks. If we're going through all of that, showing us the various ways that, well, speaking of ways, right, to represent the kind of meta solution we have in mind. And even that has evolved, right, and will continue to evolve. So the tool itself is expanding, right? Those set of platforms and people, what have you, right? As more solutionaries come in with more, solutions, which in turn augment the machine. In a sense, Evel Knievel's the limitations were that of the motorcycle upon which he was riding, to a certain extent. I imagine if he had a rocket, he could go a little farther. In any case, it's a whole new modality to get airborne, going along like we've been going along, right? Once we get to the cliff, isn't going to be enough to clear it. We're going to go down, right? The forces against us will be too great. It's not unless we have liftoff that we have a capable machine and hopefully driver, operator, which is collective intelligence itself, right? Not only as which of course combined with the solutionaries, right, is what gives it its telos, namely, right, its aim or goal to clear the Grand Chasm, namely to make the world whole again. And that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen if we aren't able to address climate change as the Earth heats up and the problems become compounded, perhaps exponentially. We need a response that's proportionate to the problem. That's why we need collective intelligence. That's why we need a meta platform to generate the solutions needed in time. If we, to the extent that we have a network of platforms and of people in place, a micro contribution, no matter how small, can make the difference between a problem being solved and unsolved. And so, again, we want to leverage that intelligence, that's in us. And so, yeah, it's exciting times, both because of the dramatic changes we're seeing, but also because of the possibilities. So yeah, I don't have much more to say at this time, but I just feel like Evel Knievel had the right idea, right? Man and machine, can get us far if they're well integrated and work together.
Totally. I just want to show one more series of images just to show that we really do have a proportional response at the ready for even exponentially growing climate change. And that's with the evolution of radical collective intelligence. If this blue rectangle represents the platform or the meta solution, the platform actually, and the actual intelligence grows on top of that platform as represented by this brain. With the proper platform and more people participating, that intelligence can grow and grow and grow until it's essentially constrained by the platform. At which point we use this meta solution of collective intelligence to design and build a bigger platform, a better platform, which will support even more intelligence, more people, more ideas, more micro contributions, and so on. So we are on the cusp of exponentially growing collective intelligence so that we can finally win this cosmic game of chicken between exponentially growing abrupt climate change and exponentially growing intelligence. And that's all I have to say. Michael, I give you the last word, and then we can see you all in the next one. You're on mute, Michael. You're still muted.
I uttered the words, Jamin, but anyway, I think that the next series where the next episode in the series, we're going to go deeper, right, into the meta solution, right, and get more specific about what we envision and what we're actually, what we've envisioned and what we're re-envisioning, right? So stay tuned.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you all for watching. We'll see you on the next one.